Get ready for supernatural horror stories based on real experiences, with evil presences, restless spirits, and haunted places that will mess with your mind. Like the story you're about to hear, where a group of friends sneaks into an abandoned hospital and ends up face to face with something that should have never been awakened. But before we jump into the story, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any terrifying tales. That summer was the hottest in a decade, and right at the peak of the heat wave, we decided to pull the dumbest stunt of our lives, exploring the old abandoned city hospital, left to rot for over 20 years. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were stuck in that weekend boredom with nothing to do, when Jake dropped the idea, what if we checked out that abandoned hospital near the old train station? At first, everyone laughed, thinking he was joking, but you could tell by the look in his eyes, he was dead serious. Then there was Tyler, always the bravest or the most reckless, who didn't hesitate for a second. Let's do it. But if one of us dies, I'm telling your moms it was all Jake's fault. The building was creepy just from a distance. It was like time had frozen there in the 80s. Shattered windows, peeling walls, and those old wooden boards nailed over the entrances, as if someone had tried to lock something inside. But of course, we weren't about to let a little thing like sealed doors ruin our adventure. With a few solid kicks, we pried one of the boards loose and made our way in. The smell hit us first, a warning we should have taken seriously. It was this sickening mix of mold, old medicine, and something else. Something organic, like rotting meat, but worse. Tyler turned on his phone flashlight, and the first thing the beam revealed was a rusted gurney in the middle of the hallway, covered with a stained sheet, dark red and crusty. "It's just rust," Jake said, but his voice was thinner than usual. We kept moving, and every room felt like a time capsule. Ancient X-ray machines, patient files still scattered on desks, even a wheelchair with one wheel bent, like someone had fled in a hurry. The air was heavy, but we tried to play it off with jokes and teasing. Tyler grabbed an empty fire extinguisher and pretended to spray me, shouting, "Fire, everybody run!" We laughed, but the echo of his voice died fast, swallowed by the dark corridors. That's when I started feeling it. That weird sensation. The cold prickle on the back of my neck. The feeling that we weren't alone. The others didn't seem to notice, so I stepped back, saying I needed some air. I headed toward the main hallway, where a broken window let in the fading afternoon light. That's when I saw it. At the end of the hallway, standing in front of one of the doors, was a figure. Thin, pale, dressed in one of those old hospital gowns, the fabric thin and worn. Its skin looked wrong, almost translucent, and its eyes, they were deep dark but somehow glowing, like they were reflecting a light that wasn't there. It didn't move, didn't breathe. It just stood there, staring. Then, slowly, it raised a skeletal arm and pointed right at me. I didn't think, didn't scream, I just felt my blood turn to ice and my legs move on their own. "Run!" I don't know if it was me who shouted or one of the others, but suddenly we were all in a panic, slamming into walls, tripping, sprinting toward the entrance we'd broken into. And even in the chaos, I swear I heard something behind us, something dragging, something smiling. But we didn't look back. We ran until we couldn't anymore, only stopping when we were across the street far from that cursed place. Jake was nearly puking from running so hard. Tyler was bent over, gasping for air. And me? I still felt that cold creep down my spine, like it had followed us. "You saw it, didn't you? You saw it?" I yelled, and the others went silent. Tyler looked at me with wide eyes and muttered, "I didn't see anything. I just ran because you screamed." But Jake, he was pale as a ghost. "I saw it," he whispered. "It wasn't just you. It was there, and it pointed at us." His voice was shaking, and for the first time since I'd known him, Jake looked terrified. We stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the hospital like it might come to life at any second. The worst part? Even from a distance, the place felt different. Before, it was just an old building, but now there was something wrong. The shadows in the corridors seemed to move on their own, and I swore I could hear a faint noise, like something dragging its feet across the floor inside. Tyler, who had been playing tough the whole time, finally broke. "Let's get the hell out of here, now." No one argued. We practically ran all the way to Jake's house. His mom asked why we looked so pale, and Tyler lied on the spot. "Oh, we just got spooked by a rat in the woods." But I knew it wasn't just that. That thing wasn't a rat. It wasn't a homeless person. It wasn't a trick of the light. It had seen us. And worse, I had the feeling it knew we'd seen it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face, those dark eyes, that skeletal finger pointing at me. And in the middle of the night, I swear I heard something. A whisper from the corner of the room. "You'll come back." But no, that wasn't possible. It was just the wind. It had to be the wind. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a nightmare, anything. But deep down, I knew. That place wasn't done with us. Jake disappeared. He stopped answering texts, didn't show up at school. When we finally went to his house, his mom said he'd spent the whole night screaming about a woman in his room, and now he was locked up in the psychiatric ward, the same hospital we'd broken into. Tyler, who had always been the skeptic, started seeing things too. He called me at 3 a.m., his voice barely a whimper. "It's at my window, it's watching me." The next day, he vanished. The police found his phone near the abandoned hospital. And me? I was the only one who didn't go back. Maybe that's why I'm still here telling this story. But it hasn't given up on me. Sometimes, in the reflection of the mirror, I see something behind me. Something thin, pale, with a smile that isn't human. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the same whisper, "You'll come back." And the worst part? I know that one day, I will. Because abandoned places aren't empty. They're just waiting. Creepy, right? What did you think of that story? From 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Drop your opinion down in the comments. Exploring an abandoned hospital is already terrifying on its own. But coming face to face with evil inside an ordinary house is something even more intense. The story you're about to see shows what happens when the supernatural isn't just lurking in the shadows, but actually steps into your home and stares you down. The smell of sulfur hit us before we even parked in front of that house. I remember looking at my dad, waiting for him to crack a joke, to let out that laugh of his and say it was just a busted pipe or something. But he just gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His face was the face of a man who knew exactly what he was walking into. Me? I just wanted to believe this whole trip was some kind of mistake. My dad was the guy people called when weird stuff went down. In our world, he had a reputation for handling cases no one else would touch. Possessions, curses, that heavy energy that clings to a place and won't let go. I grew up hearing his stories, sure, but to me it was all just folklore. Scared people seeing things, you know, until that night. We just finished dinner when the phone rang. Dad answered, and I saw his face change in an instant. He didn't say much, just scribbled down an address and hung up. Mom knew before he even opened his mouth. "Not again," she said, her voice thick with the exhaustion of someone who'd fought this battle 1,000 times. But all he said was, "This one's different, and I need to take him with me." Him. Me. I laughed in his face. "You're crazy. I've got a test tomorrow." But Dad didn't even blink. "You've got a gift, son, you just don't know it yet." A gift? The only gift I had was getting wrecked in video games. But he insisted, said I felt things other people didn't. Then he dropped the bomb. "It's a possessed woman, and she asked for us." No amount of arguing changed his mind. An hour later, we were on the road, and I was kicking myself for not putting up more of a fight. Until we turned onto that dead-end street and the air just shifted. You know that feeling when you walk into a place and it's like the weight of the world suddenly lands on your shoulders? That's what it was like. The whole neighborhood looked normal. But that house, it was wrong. All the lights were off, even though it was only 9 at night. And the windows, man, the windows looked like dead eyes. Dad parked and turned to me. "Don't touch anything. Don't answer if something calls your name. And don't panic." I just nodded, my throat tight. When we got out of the car, the sulfur smell was even stronger, mixed with something sickly sweet and rotten. And the worst part? I knew we were being watched, not by someone at the window. It was like the house itself was staring at us. We climbed the porch steps and the front door creaked open on its own. Dad walked in like it was no big deal, but I nearly froze. The air inside was ice cold, yet I could feel something hot brushing the back of my neck like breath. And then I heard it. Someone whispered my name. It wasn't Dad. It wasn't the possessed woman. It was a voice coming from behind me, but when I spun around there was no one there. Just the dark hallway, the walls stained with dampness. And then it came again, closer this time, like someone was right up against my ear. That's when I felt it. Fingers. Something invisible poked my back, shoving me farther into the house. I jumped, but Dad didn't even react. He was already kneeling on the living room floor, pulling out candles, crucifixes, and an old book from his bag. In the middle of the room, tied to a chair, was the woman. At first glance, she looked normal, but then she lifted her head and I saw her eyes. They weren't just black, they were empty, like holes, like something that should have died a long time ago. And then she smiled at me, and I knew we shouldn't have come. She wasn't possessed by a demon. She was full of them. I froze. The woman started laughing, but it wasn't human. It was a jagged, tearing sound, like a dozen voices were fighting their way out of her throat at once. Dad lit a candle and threw salt on the floor, drawing a circle around her. He didn't even look scared. It was like he'd known exactly what we were up against the whole time. Me? I could feel sweat dripping down my back. The air in the house was thick, like it was packed with something invisible clinging to my skin. And the woman. She wouldn't stop looking at me. That impossible grin, like someone had hooked the corners of her mouth and stretched them too wide. Dad started reciting something in a language I didn't understand, and the woman screamed. Not in pain. It was pure, seething hatred. The windows rattled, and I swear I saw the shadows on the walls moving on their own, stretching toward me. That's when I heard it again. You're going to die here. The voice came from everywhere at once. It wasn't the woman speaking. It was something inside her, something that knew my name, that knew I was scared. Dad kept up the ritual, but I couldn't move. It was like the house was draining my energy, my courage. Then the curtains flew open. Not from the wind. There was no wind. It was like invisible hands had yanked them apart all at once. And outside, there was nothing. Just darkness. Like the house had been ripped out of the neighborhood and dropped somewhere far from anything normal. The woman started thrashing in the chair, her bones cracking like they were breaking and knitting back together. Her voice kept changing. Sometimes a child's, sometimes an old man's, sometimes something that didn't sound human at all. Dad shouted an order, slamming the crucifix into the floor, and the woman howled. It was a sound straight from hell, and I felt a heat in my chest like something inside me was reacting. That's when I got it. Dad hadn't brought me along by accident. He knew I could feel what was happening, and worse, whatever was inside that woman knew it too. She stopped struggling for a second, and those black eyes locked onto me again. He brought you to us, she hissed, her voice full of teeth. Now you're ours. I looked at Dad, waiting for him to say it was a lie, that it was just part of the trance. But the look on his face, he was terrified. For real. And in that moment, I realized we might not make it out of there alive. That's when the crucifix in Dad's hand started to burn. No, I mean literally. The wood was smoldering like it had been tossed into a fire. He grunted in pain but didn't let go. Instead, he reached into his pocket and threw a handful of white powder into the woman's face. She screamed like she'd been hit with acid, and then the whole house shook. Walls groaning, glass shattering, and that hellish voice wailing in a dozen different pitches. I dropped to my knees, my head pounding with a deafening ring. It was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Even the candlelight bent, casting shadows that made no sense. Arms too long, mouths open in silent screams. The woman started convulsing, foam bubbling from her mouth, and then, splat. Something black and slimy oozed out of her nose, hitting the floor like a giant slug. Dad jumped back, yelling at me not to touch it. The thing writhed, letting out a high-pitched hiss, and then dissolved into smoke. Silence. The woman slumped in the chair, gasping, her eyes normal again, just wide with terror. The curtains closed on their own. The sulfur smell vanished. Even the weight in the air lifted, like someone had pulled a heavy blanket off my back. Dad let out a rough sigh and went to untie her. I was still frozen, staring at the black puddle on the floor that was now evaporating. "What? What was that?" I stammered. He didn't even look at me. Something that doesn't belong here. We left that house in silence. The woman sobbed in the back seat, curled up. It wasn't until we were on the road home that Dad spoke, quiet. "You felt it, didn't you? From the start." I didn't answer, but we both knew. Mom nearly took Dad's head off when we got home. She screamed, cried, threw things. He didn't argue. He just said one thing before heading to their room. "Never again." And he kept his word. I never saw him take another case, but to this day, when I hear a whisper in the dark or feel something watching me when there's no one there, I remember those black eyes and the voice that said, "Now you're ours." Because some doors, once opened, never close all the way. And me? I never doubted what my dad did again. I just hope he locked that door tight enough. So scary. After an exorcism that intense, anyone would think twice before messing with the spirit world again. But sometimes the presences on the other side aren't always so aggressive. Like in the story you're about to hear, where a babysitter encounters something unexpectedly present, and maybe even friendly. I should have never ignored that black hair. It happened on a Thursday night, one of those endless, dragging nights. I'd been babysitting Lily since she was about 3, and by then she was 5. A little blonde ball of energy, the kind of kid who wears you out with play but wins you over with a single smile. Her parents' house was big, old, the kind that creaks on its own, but nothing weird had ever happened there. Until that night. The evening started like any other. I tucked Lily into bed, read her a story, and she drifted off. I headed to the living room to watch TV. The apartment was quiet, just the low hum of the television and the wind tapping lightly against the window. Then, tick-tock, tick-tock. I froze. Footsteps, light but clear, coming from the hallway leading to the bathroom. My heart skipped. "Lily?" I called softly. Nothing. The TV kept playing, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. I stood still, listening. The footsteps stopped. I took a deep breath. Just the house settling, I told myself, trying to convince myself. That's when I saw it. At the edge of the hallway door, something moved. A shadow? No, it wasn't a shadow. It was hair. Black, long hair sliding slowly as if someone were walking down the hall and only the tips of the strands had peeked out. My blood ran cold. Lily was blonde, and I knew she was asleep. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. "Is someone there?" I asked, louder this time. Silence. The hallway was empty when I reached it, but the air, it felt heavy, like something had just passed through. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, the room dark. I swear I felt a chill down my spine, the kind that isn't natural. I tiptoed to Lily's room, barely breathing. She was there, curled up, fast asleep. Nothing out of the ordinary. I checked under the bed, in the closet. Nothing. I must have imagined it, I thought, relieved. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, coming from the darkest corner of the room. "She's so cute when she sleeps." My entire body froze. It wasn't Lily. The voice was gentle, almost sweet, but not human. Not in any way I recognized. And the worst part? Lily didn't wake up, didn't stir, as if it were normal, as if she already knew that voice. I backed out of the room slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I stayed in the living room, staring at the hallway, waiting. For what, I didn't know. But nothing else happened that night. The next day, I asked Lily if she had an imaginary friend. She smiled, mysterious, and said, "Sometimes we play hide and seek." And I decided not to ask any more questions. From that day on, I started noticing things, little details that didn't add up. Lily had always been a calm kid, but after that night she was different, more lively, like she'd made a new friend. And the worst part? I couldn't ignore the signs. One afternoon, while helping her draw at the kitchen table, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Lily's blonde hair clip rolled across the table on its own, as if someone had pushed it. Lily giggled, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "She likes to play with me," she said, not even looking up from her drawing. "She?" I asked, trying to hide the tightness in my chest. Lily just nodded, smiling. "My friend. She says you're nice." I didn't know what to do. Tell her parents? They'd think I was making things up, or worse, that I wasn't cut out for the job. But how could I ignore it? Every night I heard light footsteps in the hallway. Sometimes the TV changed channels on its own. And Lily was always talking to someone I couldn't see. I decided that if I couldn't fight it, at least I'd try to understand. One night after putting Lily to bed, I left a glass of juice on the table and said out loud, "If you want, you can have some." Nothing happened right away, but the next morning the glass was empty. Lily looked at me with a sly little smile. She liked it, said thanks. That's when I realized this presence didn't want to scare us. Quite the opposite. It seemed to protect Lily. Once she tripped on the rug, and before I could even react, she stopped midair, as if someone had caught her. Lily laughed like it was all part of the game, but not everything was so simple. One night, I woke up to a noise in Lily's room. When I went in, she was sitting up in bed, talking to the darkest corner of the room. "No, not tonight," she said, with a firmness that didn't match her age. "Lily?" I called, and she turned to me serious. "She's mad. Wants me to go with her." My blood ran cold. "Go where?" Lily just shrugged. "Outside. Into the dark." At that moment, I felt a heavy energy in the room, like the air had thickened. I went to her bed and took her hand. It was ice cold. "No one's taking you anywhere," I said, staring at the empty corner. "You stay here, with us." I made sure to leave the hallway light on that night, and for the first time since it all started, I felt afraid. Because now I knew this thing could be friendly, but it could also not be. After that night, things were never the same. I started including Lily's imaginary friend in our games. I'd leave an empty space at the table as if someone else were sitting there. I'd set out an extra cup during snack time, and strangely, the house felt lighter. The footsteps in the hallway no longer scared me, they were just her friend passing by. The TV stopped changing channels on its own. Even the air seemed easier to breathe. Lily was radiant. "She likes you," she told me one afternoon while we colored. "Says you're the best babysitter I've ever had." I smiled, but part of me wondered, how many babysitters had this thing seen come and go? The strangest moment was when Lily took a handful of candies and lined up two. "This one's yours, this one's mine, and this one's hers," she said, pointing to the empty space. When I came back half an hour later, the candy was gone. Only the wrapper remained, neatly folded. But what really convinced me this was real was the day I was sick with the flu. Lily brought me a glass of water I hadn't asked for. "She said you need to drink," she explained. When I took the glass, the water was warm. Exactly how I liked it when I was sick. How could it have known that? Lily's family moved a few months later. Her dad got a promotion in another city. On my last night with her, Lily gave me a tight hug and whispered in my ear, "She says she'll miss you too." I never saw Lily again. But to this day, when I'm alone at home and hear a strange noise, I pause and smile. "Come on in," I say softly. Sometimes, I get the distinct feeling I'm not alone and it doesn't scare me anymore. Because I learned something from all of this. Not everything we can't see is necessarily bad. Some presences just want company. And now, when the wind rattles a door on its own or something falls for no reason, I just nod to myself. Who knows? Maybe it's Lily's friend, stopping by to say hi. Weird, right? Not every supernatural presence comes with bad intentions. But that doesn't mean it won't leave us shaken. And speaking of fear, the next story shows how something as simple as a noise at the window can turn into a living nightmare, especially when you live on the second floor. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it probably means you're enjoying these stories. So go ahead and hit that like button to let YouTube know you love this kind of content, and to make sure you don't miss the next horror story. The cup fell again. I was rinsing the last spoon from dinner when I heard that dry sound, that sharp tap against the kitchen floor. I turned slowly, already knowing what I'd find. The same plastic cup, that faded blue one, rolling across the floor like it had been thrown. But there was no one there, nothing. No wind, no tremor, no cat. Because we don't even have a cat. The night before, the same thing had happened. I'd ignored it, of course. Things fall, cabinets are sneaky. Life goes on. But now, with the house empty, my brother had gone out to run some errands. That sound echoed differently. More intentional. It felt like an invisible finger poking the back of my neck, whispering, "Hey, you're not alone." I left the dishes soaking and walked over to the cup. Picked it up, turning it in my hand like I could uncover some secret. No cracks, no explanation. Just the heavy silence of the house, the kind of quiet that clings to your ears. That's when I heard it. A snap, from upstairs. My bedroom was on the second floor, and that sound was unmistakable, like someone had stepped on a forgotten toy. But I knew I hadn't left anything there. My heart raced, but I forced myself to rationalize. It's probably the roof, a rat, the wind knocking something over. But there was no wind, and rats don't make such a sharp, deliberate noise. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. My bedroom door was slightly ajar. I was sure I'd closed it. I pushed it open with my fingertips, my heart pounding in my throat. Empty. Nothing on the floor, nothing out of place. Just the made bed and the window. The window was closed, but the curtain swayed gently. I swore I'd left it still. I stepped closer, looking down at the street below. Nothing unusual, just the broken street lamp on the corner flickering, like always. That's when I felt it. That cold. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the AC. We didn't even have one. It was a chill from within, like someone had traced a wet finger down the back of my neck. I spun around, expecting to see something. But there was just the room, the closet, the lamp. Everything normal. That night when my brother got home, I told him. He gave that awkward half laugh, the kind you use when you don't want to seem crazy but also don't believe it. "Dude, you've been watching too many horror movies." He patted my shoulder and went to grab a beer. I wanted to believe he was right. I really did. But then came the dead of night. I woke up to a very clear sound, tap, 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 fingers, tapping on the glass. My blood turned to ice. I was on the second floor. There were no trees near the window, no way it could be a branch. Tap, tap, tap. It was a rhythm, almost musical. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't not look. I turned slowly, my muscles locked, and nothing. Just the dark glass reflecting my pale face. No hand, no shadow. Just my own terror staring back at me. I bolted out of bed and ran to my brother's room, nearly tripping in the hallway. He woke up startled, and I must have looked like a lunatic, because he didn't even complain when I shouted, "There's something in this house." He let me sleep on the couch that night, and in the following days nothing else happened. But I knew. Something had noticed me. And now, it knew that I knew. 3 weeks passed. No falling cups, no tapping on the window. My brother even joked, "Where's your ghost, man?" I laughed along, but it was that short, tight laugh of someone who's always listening to the corners of the house. Because even without the noises, there was one thing that didn't go away. The feeling. That sense that when I turned my back, something moved too fast for me to see. And then, on some random Tuesday, the power went out. It wasn't a normal blackout. The TV cut off, the lights died, but the worst part was the silence. No street noise, no hum of the fridge, just my breathing and scratching, far off in the hallway. That thin, deliberate sound, like someone dragging their nails slowly down the wall. My brother had gone out to grab pizza, so I froze in the living room, holding my phone with the dim light pointed at the door. Scratching. Closer. I stood up slowly, my bare feet cold on the floor. The hallway was a dark tunnel, and I knew I shouldn't go there. But something pulled me. One step. Another. Until I saw it. On the wall, just above the light switch, 3 thin marks. Deep scratches like they'd been made by something much sharper than human nails. And beneath them, dark stains. I touched them with my fingertips and they were wet. Not water. Warm, sticky. And the smell. Blood. I nearly threw up. I stumbled back so fast I hit the opposite wall, and that's when I heard it. Someone breathing. Not me. Not the wind. A tired sigh coming from inside my bedroom. I ran. Didn't think, didn't look back. I took the stairs 2 at a time and nearly ripped the front door off its hinges. My brother was just arriving, pizza in hand, and I must have looked insane because he dropped the box and grabbed my arm. "What the hell?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed at the stairs, cold sweat dripping down my back. He went up, searched the whole house, even under the bed. Nothing. But when he came back, he was pale. "What's that on the mirror?" I followed him into the bathroom. The mirror was fogged like someone had breathed on it, and in the middle of the steam, one word written with a finger: "Watch out." We left that house the same night, stayed in a cheap motel for days until we rented another place. My brother never joked about it again. Sometimes when we talk about it, he goes quiet and stares at nothing, like he's still hearing something. And me? I never do the dishes alone anymore. Terrifying. What did you think of that story? From 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Share your opinion in the comments. I woke up in the middle of the night to that kind of silence that feels louder than any noise. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl, like something isn't right. Beside me, Emily breathed deeply, still asleep. But our old cat, Whiskers, was perched at the foot of the bed, his eyes locked on the dark hallway. His fur was on end, his body tense, as if he was staring at something I couldn't see. We'd moved into that house 3 weeks earlier. It was bigger, more spacious, a dream after years of crammed apartments. But from day one, something told me the house wasn't empty, not the way it should have been. At first, it was small things. Whiskers, who'd always been a laid-back cat, started acting strange. He'd stare down the hallway at night, pupils dilated, tail puffed up. Sometimes he'd bolt out of nowhere, like he was running from something. Emily said he was just adjusting, but I'd known that cat for years. He didn't act like this. Then the noises started. Emily heard it first. One night she shook me awake, her grip tight on my arm. "There's someone in the kitchen," she whispered, her voice trembling. I grabbed my phone to light the way and went to check. Nothing. But the air was thick with the feeling that someone had just slipped away. And then I heard it. A faint shh from behind the fridge. A whisper that wasn't human, but not quite a house noise either. I tore the kitchen apart. Nothing broken, nothing out of place. The alarms were untouched. The motion sensors hadn't gone off. And the worst part? I knew I wasn't imagining it. Because Emily had heard it too. The next night it was footsteps. I was alone in the living room watching a movie when I heard a slow, heavy drag of feet in the hallway, like someone was pacing back and forth. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and went to look. Nothing. But when I got back to the living room, the pots on the rack had crashed to the floor, all at once, like someone had swept them off. The weird thing was, the house had a history. The previous owner, Mrs. Clark, had been a hoarder. She'd lived there for decades before dying alone. We only found that out after we moved in, when the neighbors started dropping hints. "That house always had a bad vibe," one of them said, half joking, half serious. Emily's sensitive to stuff like this. She'd had experiences before, like the time an old radio turned itself on at her grandma's house, playing a song no one recognized. Me? I've always seen things. Since I was a kid, I'd catch quick glimpses, shadows in the corners of my eyes, figures that vanished when I turned my head. I never messed with Ouija boards or the occult, but these things seemed to follow me. Now they were in our house. I hadn't tried smudging the place or calling someone to cleanse the energy yet. Part of me wanted to believe it was just Whiskers being skittish, or the house settling, old wood creaking. But another part knew better. Because every night something happened. A noise, a whisper, a presence we could feel but not see. And the worst part? I didn't know if it just wanted to scare us or if something worse was coming. I never thought I'd be afraid of my own home. But that night, with my heart pounding so loud I could hear it, I knew something was wrong. We'd started sleeping with the hallway light on just in case. And Whiskers now refused to come into the bedroom at night. He'd just sit outside, meowing softly, like he was trying to warn us. Then Emily saw it. She woke me up, shaking, her eyes wide with tears, her breath coming fast. There was someone at the foot of the bed, she said, her voice barely a whimper. Someone, or something, just staring at me. I searched the whole room, checked the closet, looked under the bed. Nothing, but the air was icy, even in the summer heat, and I could feel it again. That sensation of being watched, like there were eyes in the walls. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I asked the older neighbors about the house, and that's when I heard the full story. Mrs. Clark hadn't just died of old age. She'd disappeared, vanished inside her own home, and when they found her body weeks later, it was hidden behind a pile of newspapers like she'd been shoved there. That's when everything got worse. I was in the kitchen drinking a glass of water when I heard a noise from the basement, a place we never used, still cluttered with the old owner's junk. It was a slow, deliberate scratching sound, like something was climbing the stairs, scraping against the wood. Whiskers started hissing, his back arched, and then, bang, the basement door slammed shut on its own. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone, lit up the stairs, and went down. The air was thick, smelling of mildew and something else. Something sweet like rotting meat. And in the darkest corner, behind a stack of boxes, there was a stain on the wall. Not mold, not dirt. It looked like the paint had melted, forming an outline, almost like a silhouette. That's when I heard the whisper again, this time right behind my ear. "Get out!" I bolted back upstairs, locked the door, and swore I'd never go down there again. But the house wasn't done. Pots started flying off the counter, lights flickered on their own, and one night I woke up to Emily screaming. She swore something had grabbed her arm. In the end, we didn't have a choice. We called a priest, a medium, anyone who could help. And when the ritual started, the house reacted. Wind where no windows were open, pounding on the walls, and Whiskers, my brave old cat, finally came into the bedroom and just stared at an empty corner, growling. The priest said it was something old, something that had lingered after Mrs. Clark died, something that didn't want to leave. We moved out a week later, left everything behind, the furniture, the clothes, even the dishes. We only took Whiskers. But even now, when the wind howls or I hear a whisper in the dead of night, I wonder, did we really escape? Or did something come with us? And after all that, it's kinda hard not to look at the dark hallway in your house a little differently, isn't it? If these stories kept you hooked until now, that means you're into this kind of atmosphere. So make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss the next supernatural experiences we'll be sharing here. If you stayed with me all the way to the end, comment "till the end" down below, just so I know who my real ones are. And don't forget to hit the like button if any of these stories gave you chills, or at least made you think twice before turning off the lights. Oh, and there's another video right here that connects perfectly with this one. Click it and come with me over there. Things only get stranger from here.